The acrid wind carried the scent of decay through the hollow shell of what was once a thriving metropolis. Towers of steel and glass, now mere skeletons, reached toward a sky perpetually shrouded in ash. Kyle pulled his tattered respirator tighter against his face as he navigated through the maze of crumbling infrastructure. The silence was deafening. No birds, no insects, no human voices. Just the occasional groan of collapsing structures and the whisper of toxic breezes through empty windows. For as long as he could remember, Kyle had lived in the shadows of this dead city. The old sewage tunnels beneath the financial district had become his sanctuary, a labyrinth he knew better than anyone else alive. Not that there was competition for that title. As far as he knew, he was the last one. The last survivor of whatever cataclysm had wiped humanity from existence. His lean frame moved with practiced stealth through the debris. Years of scavenging had honed his movements to mechanical precision. Each step calculated, each breath measured. Survival wasn't just an instinct for Kyle, it was the only purpose he had left. The hunting creatures came out at dusk. Nobody knew what they were exactly. Some evolutionary response to the disaster, perhaps, or escaped experiments that had adapted to the new world. Kyle called them shadows, for their tendency to move just beyond the corner of your vision. By the time you saw them clearly, it was already too late. As the dying sun cast long shadows across the wasteland, Kyle descended into his underground haven. The heavy metal hatch sealed with a familiar clang that echoed through the concrete tunnels. Home, if such a concept still existed, was a junction chamber he had fortified over the years. Salvaged solar batteries powered a single light that cast a sickly yellow glow over his collection of scavenged treasures. Canned foods with faded labels, water purifiers, weapons cobbled together from broken machinery, and most precious of all, a communications device he had spent years trying to repair. That night, as Kyle huddled over his meager dinner of preserved protein, the device emitted a sound it had never made before, a high-pitched series of beeps that cut through the stillness of his sanctuary. Startled, he knocked over his plate as he lunged for the machine. The cracked display flickered to life, showing a pattern of coordinates and a single repeating message. Protocol Omega initiated. Last survivors converge. Coordinates follow. Kyle's heart hammered against his ribs. Was it possible? After all these years of solitude, could there be others? His fingers trembled as he traced the coordinates on his salvaged map. The location was in the industrial sector, buried deep beneath what was once the city's largest research facility, Nexus Laboratories. Sleep eluded him that night. The possibility of finding others like himself warred with the fear of what might await him. What if it was a trap, or worse? What if he found nothing but another dead end in a world full of disappointments? But the message had used those words, last survivors, and they resonated within him like a forgotten melody. Morning came, and with it, resolution. Kyle packed his essentials, a knife fashioned from helicopter blade fragments, his most reliable pistol with precious few bullets, purification tablets, and dried rations. The journey would take him across the most exposed parts of the city, areas he had carefully avoided for years. But if there was even the slightest chance of finding others, of not being alone in this wasteland, he had to take it. The surface world greeted him with its usual hostility. Radiation pockets still lingered in certain areas, invisible killers that his crude detector could only approximately identify. He skirted the edges of the financial district, keeping to the shadows of fallen skyscrapers. Each step away from his familiar territory sent anxiety spiraling through his chest. By midday, he had reached the edge of the university quarter, a once proud collection of academic buildings now reduced to rubble and twisted metal. Something moved in his peripheral vision. Kyle froze, hand instinctively reaching for his knife. It wasn't a shadow. It was worse. Raiders. They were rare these days, Most had died off from radiation poisoning or starvation, but the few who remained were more desperate than ever. This group had modified themselves with crude mechanical appendages, scavenged technology grafted directly onto flesh. 3 of them emerged from the ruins of a library, their faces hidden behind improvised masks decorated with circuit boards and metal scraps. Well, the tallest one croaked through a voice modulator. A wanderer. Been a while since we've seen fresh meat. Kael calculated his odds. 3 against 1, and they were blocking his path forward. Running would waste precious energy, and bullets would attract shadows. He raised his hands slowly. "I'm just passing through," he said, his voice raspy from disuse. "I have nothing worth taking." The leader laughed, a sound like grinding gears. "Everyone has something worth taking, if nothing else. Your parts." They advanced slowly, confident in their superiority. Kyle waited until the leader was within arm's reach before making his move. Years of solitary training had made him faster than they expected. His knife slashed across the leader's chest, cutting through the jury-rigged armor and drawing a surprised scream. The fight was brief but vicious. Kyle took a glancing blow from a metal pipe that would leave his shoulder bruised for weeks, but his desperation proved stronger than their hunger. When it was over, 2 raiders lay unconscious, and the 3rd fled back into the ruins, trailing blood and curses, shaking with adrenaline. Kyle salvaged what he could from their crude weaponry before continuing his journey. The encounter had cost him time and energy, but it had also proved something important. He still had a reason to survive. As the industrial sector loomed on the horizon, a new silhouette appeared against the skyline, a slender observation tower that didn't match his memory of the city's layout. It stood tall among the ruins, too intact to be a remnant of the old world. Someone had built this, recently, approaching with caution. Kyle circled the structure. It was constructed from salvaged materials, shipping containers welded together vertically with a small platform at the top. A lookout post. But for whom? The answer came in the form of a rifle barrel pointed at his head. "Don't move," a voice commanded from above. "Hands where I can see them." Kyle complied, heart racing. The voice was female, young, and very much alive. "I'm following the signal," he called up. "Protocol Omega." A long silence followed, during which Kyle became acutely aware of his vulnerability. Finally, the rifle barrel withdrew. "Wait there." Minutes later, a figure descended from the tower using a complex pulley system. She landed with practiced grace a few meters from Kyle, rifle still ready, but no longer aimed directly at him. She was younger than he expected, perhaps in her mid-20s, with dark skin and a mass of tightly coiled hair pulled back in practical braids. Her clothing was a patchwork of technical fabrics and reinforced leather, and a pair of enhanced goggles hung around her neck. "You received the signal too?" she asked, her voice cautious but not hostile. Kyle nodded. "First transmission I've picked up in years. Are there others?" "Not that I've found." She studied him with intense scrutiny. "I'm Mila. Been watching this sector from my tower for the past year. The signal started 3 days ago." "Kyle, I've been living in the tunnels beneath the financial district." Her eyes widened slightly. "Alone?" The question struck him as odd. "Yes, aren't we all?" Something flashed across her face. Pity, perhaps, or uncertainty. "Not exactly. I came from a shelter to the north. There were 30 of us. Once. Were." Mila's expression hardened. "Disease took most. The rest left to find the creators." "Creators?" "Just an old story. That someone made all this happen on purpose, and that they're still out there, waiting for the right survivors." She shrugged. Desperate people believe desperate things. Yet here she was, following a mysterious signal to an abandoned research facility. Kyle didn't point out the irony. The coordinates lead to Nexus Labs, he said instead. It's not far from here, but the area is crawling with shadows. Mila slung her rifle over her shoulder. Then we'd better move fast. I've got supplies in the tower. We can rest there before heading to the lab tomorrow. Kyle hesitated. Years of solitude had made trust a foreign concept. But standing before him was another human being, the first he'd encountered in almost a decade who hadn't immediately tried to kill him. If nothing else, that deserved consideration. Lead the way, he said finally. Mila's tower was a marvel of post-apocalyptic engineering. Solar panels powered a small generator that provided electricity for basic needs. Rainwater collection systems fed into filters that produced clean drinking water. She had created a self-sustaining outpost in the middle of desolation. As night fell, they shared a meal of cultured protein and hydroponically grown vegetables, luxuries Kyle had almost forgotten existed, by the light of an LED lamp. Mila spread out her own map of the area, more detailed than Kyle's. Nexus Labs was cutting edge before the collapse, she explained, tracing the outline of the facility. Biotechnology, artificial intelligence, advanced materials. They did it all. If anyone had the resources to create a long-term survival protocol, it would have been them. You think that's what this is? Some kind of rescue operation? Mila's gaze was steady. After all this time? No, but information that's worth the risk. Maybe they documented what happened. Maybe they found a way to reverse some of the damage. Or maybe it's just another dead end. Kyle muttered. Then we'll be no worse off than before. She rolled up the map. Get some sleep. We move at first light. Sleep came surprisingly easy in the relative security of the tower. For the first time in years, Kyle wasn't alone in the darkness. The realization brought an unexpected lump to his throat. He had adapted so completely to solitude that even this small human connection felt overwhelming. Morning arrived with toxic mist clinging to the ruins. They descended from the tower and made their way toward Nexus Labs, moving in silence born of necessity rather than discomfort. Mila moved with the same calculated precision as Kyle, a survivor's gait that wasted no energy and made minimal noise. The research facility appeared on the horizon like a broken crown. Once gleaming buildings now stood as jagged remnants, their walls collapsed and their windows shattered. But beneath the surface destruction, the foundations remained intact, including, if Mila's information was correct, a vast network of underground laboratories. The main entrance would have been there, she whispered, pointing to a collapsed portico. But there should be service tunnels that lead inside, maintenance access points. They circled the perimeter, keeping to cover as much as possible. The concentration of shadows increased as they approached, dark, emaciated forms that moved with unnatural speed through the ruins. Whatever these creatures had once been, they were now perfectly adapted to hunting in this wasteland. Kale spotted the access point first, a small maintenance door half buried under fallen concrete. Together, they cleared enough debris to squeeze through, entering a dark corridor that smelled of mold and rusted metal. As the door closed behind them, Mila activated a small flashlight attached to her wrist. The beam revealed a utilitarian hallway that sloped gently downward. Emergency signs still faintly visible on the walls. Down we go, she murmured, into the rabbit hole. The descent took them through increasingly intact sections of the facility. Whatever catastrophe had destroyed the surface had left the underground levels relatively unscathed. Power systems had long since failed, but emergency lighting still functioned sporadically, casting eerie green glows through certain corridors. In what must have been a security checkpoint, they found the first body. Unlike the decayed remains Kyle occasionally encountered in the city, this one was preserved, mummified by the controlled environment. The corpse wore a lab coat, ID badge still clipped to the breast pocket. Dr. Eliana Mercer, Biological Systems Division. She didn't try to leave, Mila observed, studying the body's position. She was coming deeper in. Beyond the checkpoint, the corridors became a maze. Without the coordinates from the signal, they would have been hopelessly lost. As they ventured deeper, they began to find more evidence of the facility's last days, hastily scribbled notes, abandoned personal effects, more preserved bodies. All of them seemed to be moving inward, towards something in the heart of the complex. In what appeared to be a break room, Kyle discovered a tablet computer still functional in low-power mode. Its screen flickered to life at his touch, revealing a video log entry. The face of a haggard scientist appeared, his eyes bloodshot from exhaustion. Day 47 of isolation protocol, the man began, his voice thin with strain. Outside communications remain severed. The surface team has not reported back. We've initiated emergency power conservation measures, but critical systems in Section K can't be compromised. The subjects remain our only viable option now. The video cut to static before resuming. Ethical concerns have been noted and dismissed. Extinction leaves no room for conventional morality. The K-series must be preserved at all costs. They are, quite literally, humanity's last hope. Mila leaned over his shoulder. K-series, what was this place really working on? The question lingered as they pressed deeper into the facility. The corridors began to change, transitioning from utilitarian spaces to more specialized environments. Laboratory doors lined the hallways, most sealed shut by security protocols or physical damage. In one accessible lab, they found banks of sophisticated equipment surrounding what appeared to be a medical examination area. Screens still displayed fragmented data, genetic sequences, cellular structures, developmental metrics. This isn't just biotech, Mila whispered, studying the displays. This is something else entirely. A chill ran down Kyle's spine as he examined a series of photographs mounted on one wall. They showed human embryos in various stages of development, but with annotations that made no sense to him, references to accelerated maturation and memory implantation protocols. Mila, he called softly. I think they were creating people. Before she could respond, a mechanical humming filled the room. Dormant systems were activating around them, lights flickering on and screens rebooting. Their presence had triggered something. We should go, Kyle urged, suddenly uneasy. But Mila was transfixed by a screen that had come to life, displaying a facility map with a blinking indicator. It's showing us the way, she said, to the coordinates from the signal. The route led them deeper still, past laboratories that grew increasingly specialized. The technology became more advanced, more alien to Kyle's limited understanding. And everywhere, references to the mysterious K-series. They arrived at a massive steel door emblazoned with a symbol Kyle had never seen before, a double helix intertwined with circuitry patterns. A scanning panel beside the door glowed with quiet expectation. It wants identification, Mila said, examining the panel. Kyle approached it cautiously. We don't have... The scanner activated as he drew near, a red beam sweeping over his face and body. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a hydraulic hiss, the massive door began to slide open. How did you do that? Mila asked, her voice tight with suspicion. Kale shook his head, equally confused. I didn't. Beyond the door lay darkness, broken only by the faint blue glow of standby systems. As they stepped inside, motion sensors detected their presence, and lights activated in sequence, revealing a vast circular chamber filled with technology beyond anything they had seen before. At the center stood rows of cylindrical containers, each the size of a coffin, connected to a central processing unit. Cryogenic chambers, Kyle realized, designed for long-term preservation. Most were empty, their glass surfaces frosted over with ice, but some still contained shadowy forms. Mila moved toward a control station that was gradually coming online. Screens flickered to life, displaying information in scrolling text. Her fingers moved over the unfamiliar interface. searching for answers. "It's some kind of preservation project," she said. "These pods were designed to maintain organic material indefinitely. There's a log here, dates going back to before the collapse." Kyle was only half listening. He found himself drawn to one particular cryogenic chamber at the end of the row. Unlike the others, this one was open and empty. A small screen beside it displayed a single piece of information. "Subject K-17 status deployed." His fingers traced the label unconsciously. K-17. Something about those characters resonated within him, a familiarity he couldn't explain. Nearby, a larger display activated, responding to his proximity. "Identity confirmed. K-17, a synthetic voice announced. "Initiating status review." The screen filled with data. Medical readings, cognitive assessments, genetic profiles, and images. Images of a subject in various stages of development, from embryo to adult. Images that looked exactly like Kyle. His knees buckled beneath him as the truth crystallized in his mind. He wasn't a survivor. He was a creation. A manufactured being designed in this laboratory, deployed into the wasteland for some purpose he couldn't comprehend. "Kyle." Mila's voice seemed to come from very far away. "What is it?" He couldn't speak, could only point at the screen with a trembling hand. She approached slowly, her expression shifting from concern to shock as she absorbed the information before them. "You're one of them," she whispered. "A K-series subject." The synthetic voice continued dispassionately. "K-series. Genetically engineered biological systems designed to withstand post-collapse environments. Enhanced radiation resistance. Optimized resource utilization. Accelerated healing capabilities. Implanted with synthetic memories to simulate survivor psychology. Deployed to collect environmental data and test viability of post-human adaptations." Kyle's world collapsed around him. Everything he believed about himself, his past, his struggles, his very identity, had been manufactured. He wasn't the last survivor. He was never a survivor at all. Just an experiment released into the wild. "The signal," he managed finally, his voice hollow. "It was recalling me, like a piece of equipment." Mila's hand found his shoulder, her touch unexpectedly gentle. "There's more," she said quietly. "Look." The central monitor had changed to display a facility-wide status report. Among the scrolling information was a critical alert. Remaining K-series subjects, critical power failure imminent. Cryogenic stability compromised. Estimated viability, 72 hours. Kyle stared at the occupied cryogenic chambers with new understanding. They contained others like him. More K-series subjects, never deployed, suspended between life and death. "They're dying," he said. Mila was already examining the control systems. "The facility's backup power is failing. These systems have been running on emergency protocols for decades, but they're finally breaking down." She looked up at him, her expression unreadable. "The signal was an automated distress call. The system recognized you and activated when you came within range." Kyle moved between the occupied chambers, looking at the dim forms within. His brothers and sisters. In a sense he had never imagined. Created as he was, waiting for a world that had ended long ago. "Can they be saved?" he asked. "Maybe." Mila's fingers flew across the controls. "The system was designed with revival protocols. But the power requirements," she shook her head. "We'd need to reroute what's left of the emergency supply. It would be enough for maybe a few of them." Before Kyle could respond, a new alert blared through the chamber. Red lights flashed as security protocols activated. "Warning, unauthorized access detected," the synthetic voice announced. "Initiating containment procedures." Steel shutters began descending over the exits. In the corridors beyond, they could hear mechanical systems powering up, the facility's automated security awakening after decades of dormancy. "The system doesn't recognize me as authorized personnel," Mila said, fingers working frantically at the controls. It sees me as a threat. Override it, Kyle urged. I'm trying, but this technology is... She was cut off as the control panel locked down, screens flashing with security warnings. The synthetic voice spoke again, its tone unchanged despite the escalating danger. Attention, K-17 return to primary stasis chamber for system evaluation. All unauthorized personnel will be neutralized. Mechanical sentries entered the chamber, security robots designed to protect the facility's assets. They moved with precision despite years of inactivity. Weapon systems targeting Mila. Kale, she shouted, diving behind a console as energy weapons discharged where she had been standing. In that moment, Kyle made his choice. He wasn't just an experiment. Whatever his origins, he had lived, suffered, and survived in the wasteland. Those experiences, manufactured or not, had shaped him into something more than his creators had intended. He charged the nearest sentry, using knowledge he hadn't realized he possessed. His body moved with unexpected precision, targeting vulnerable joints and sensor arrays. The machine collapsed under his assault, but more were entering the chamber. Mila had recovered her rifle and was firing at the sentries, but conventional weapons had limited effect on their armored shells. "We need to get out of here," she called. "Not without them," Kale responded, gesturing to the occupied cryogenic chambers. "Help me find the manual release." Understanding flashed across her face. Together, they fought their way to the central control unit, dodging energy weapons and mechanical appendages. The security system was escalating its response, deploying more resources to neutralize what it perceived as a threat to its precious cargo at the main console. Mila worked feverishly to bypass the security lockdowns, while Kyle held off the sentries. Blood ran from a gash in his arm, but he felt no pain, another enhancement built into his engineered body. "Got it," Mila shouted finally. "Manual revival sequence initiated for all chambers, but Kyle, the power drain will trigger a complete system failure. The whole facility will shut down." "Do it," he commanded. With a final keystroke, she executed the command. Throughout the chamber, cryogenic pods began their revival sequences. Emergency power rerouted to support the massive energy demand, causing lights to flicker and secondary systems to fail. The security sentries stuttered in their movements as their power supply fluctuated. The synthetic voice spoke one last time, its artificial calm finally breaking into static. "Critical system failure. Containment compromised. Emergency protocols terminated." Around them, the facility began to power down. Security barriers retracted as their operating systems failed. The sentries collapsed, their threat neutralized by the very protocol meant to protect the facility's assets. In the eerie quiet that followed, Kyle and Mila watched as the cryogenic chambers completed their revival cycles, one by one. The pods opened, revealing their occupants, men and women physically identical to Kyle, yet each subtly different. K-series subjects, his siblings in creation if not in birth. They emerged confused, disoriented. Some collapsed immediately, their bodies too weak after decades of stasis. Others stood on unsteady legs, eyes wide with artificial memories that had never aligned with reality. "Who are you?" one woman asked, her voice cracking from disuse. Kyle looked at Mila, then back at the woman. "My name is Kyle. I'm like you, and we need to leave this place." Over the next few hours, they gathered what supplies they could from the failing facility. Of the 23 subjects revived, 17 were stable enough to move. The others they made as comfortable as possible, knowing they would not survive the journey to the surface. As they prepared to leave, Kyle found himself drawn back to the central computer. Despite the system failure, one screen still glowed faintly, displaying fragmented data about the K-series project. According to the records, they had been created as a final contingency plan, biological systems designed to survive in a world where natural humans could not. Their accelerated development and implanted memories were meant to give them the skills needed to navigate the wasteland without the vulnerability of childhood or the need for education. But the project had a deeper purpose. Each K-series subject carried within them genetic material preserved from thousands of human donors, a living seed bank of human diversity. Protected within radiation-resistant bodies, they were not just survivors. They were carriers of humanity's genetic legacy, designed to preserve what would otherwise be lost forever. The truth was both more profound and more humbling than Kael had imagined. He was not just an experiment, he was a vessel, carrying the future of a species that had engineered its own destruction. Mila found him still staring at the screen. "The others are ready," she said softly. "We need to move before the shadows find this place." Kael nodded, committing the final pieces of information to memory before the screen flickered out completely. Together, they led the group through the darkened corridors of the facility, retracing their steps to the surface. They emerged into the wasteland as dawn broke over the ruins. The K-series subjects blinked in the pale sunlight, experiencing direct daylight for the first time in their existence. Their faces showed a mixture of fear and wonder as they took in the desolate landscape that was now their home. "What now?" Mila asked, standing beside Kael as they watched the others explore their surroundings with cautious steps. Kael looked out over the wasteland, the broken city, the toxic mists, the dangers lurking in every shadow. It was a harsh world, but it was the only one they had. And perhaps, with what they carried within them, it could someday be more. "Now we survive," he said, "not just for ourselves, but for what we represent." She studied him for a long moment. "You're not what they intended you to be, are you? You've become something else." "We all have," he replied, watching his newly awakened kin. "That's what survival means." As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows through the ruins, Kael led his unlikely family away from the facility that had created them. They were not the last survivors. They had never been survivors at all. But in their engineered bodies, they carried something even more precious, the possibility of a new beginning. Behind them, the last lights of Nexus laboratories winked out, a failed experiment giving way to an unexpected hope. And, for the first time since he could remember, since memories had been implanted in his artificial mind, Kael walked toward the horizon not with the solitary purpose of mere survival, but with the shared burden of a future yet to be written. In the distance, through the toxic haze, Mila's observation tower stood as a beacon, the first waypoint on a journey none of them had been programmed to make. A journey not of survival, but of revival. The rebirth of something that looked like humanity but was, perhaps, something altogether new.